both of us by profession not to use words like unbelievable, and then you confront moments like this where in fact unbelievable is about the only word that seems to apply.
Yeah, I just can't, having lived through the tragedy of TWA Flight 800, which, as sad as that was, I mean, this is geometrically worse. And just thinking about the personal terror of all the people involved in this, the people on those planes. I'm sure there's teenagers and babies and adults and just normal people on those airplanes that suffered tremendous terrorism.
Yes, sir, it is hard to imagine what it must have been like on those 4 airplanes, because while the attacks on the buildings themselves happened quite quickly, these people in these airplanes were aware that something horrible was happening for perhaps an hour. The flight from Boston to New York, right around an hour, a little bit less. Clearly they knew this was something horrible had come into their lives, and they knew it for a long time.
That's probably true. And think about the fact that people obviously took control of the plane and knew something about flying one of these sophisticated fly-by-wire airplanes. I don't know how much they knew. They knew enough, obviously, to crash it into the building. I can't imagine any American pilot crashing an airplane into one of these buildings.
Now, sir,
even with a gun to their head, they wouldn't do that.
I was thinking exactly the same thing, that it is unimaginable to me, at least, that any pilot, no matter the circumstance, would have followed that order, crashed that plane into this building or that building. I don't know what they would have done, how they'd have dealt with it, but it is unimaginable they would have followed that order.
So you've got people that not only are willing to give up their lives for just a horrendously, in my view, stupid, cowardly act, but are sophisticated enough to fly a modern jet plane.
It was described by Secretary of State Schultz, and I don't know if you heard it, as an act of war against the United States. Do you see this as an act of war?
I think it's clearly an act of war. I think it's, in many ways, it's a different time, but it's everything that Pearl Harbor was and more. It just puts an exclamation point next to this dangerous world we live in, and the inability to appease people that are this demented with rhetoric. It hasn't worked. It's not going to work. We can see what happened today. All peace-loving people of the world, all people that believe in democracy and freedom need to stand against this. Any country that harbors or aids this type of activity anywhere in the world needs to declare which side they're on, and we need to seriously do something about this, and I believe we will.
Mr. Kellstrom, thank you for joining us to Washington, and our colleague Judy Woodruff. Judy.
Aaron, again, listening to your conversation with James Kellstrom and the others, it's we can only begin to grasp the magnitude of what's happened here. And I keep thinking back to what your New York City Mayor, Rudy Giuliani, said about 30 minutes ago. He looked at the camera and he said, it's safe here in New York City, everything is safe, but I would just say, without contradicting the mayor at all, that for so many people watching these pictures, it's very hard to believe or to know what is safe after 4 commercial jetliners caused the deaths that we have seen today. We have right now, we want to show you some pictures, some conversations with people on the streets of New York City this morning about the time of the airplane crashes into the World Trade Center. Let's listen.
The actual airplane hitting the building. It was surreal. As we looked at it, we thought it was something out of a movie. It just didn't seem real. The airplane just came in at a tilt. We heard the scream of the plane, then a crack, 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 boom, 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 and the plane just disappeared. You didn't see the plane anymore, and then you saw the blowout from the other side.
A lot of people equate this to something like Pearl Harbor. You were there, you saw this. Put yourself in the perspective that this is nothing's ever happened like this.
Well, I now have images that will never leave my mind. As I'm walking up from, we walked down from downtown up to Grand Central here, and I just keep seeing that airplane hitting. I saw also prior to the second airplane hitting while we were still standing there, I must have saw about 7 or 8 bodies flying through the air coming from 80 floors up. Just, they'd fall from the debris, and you just saw them cartwheeling down, bouncing off the building. It was devastating. I'm not an emotional person in the least, and I actually felt tremendous emotion at that point, because I do have a lot of friends in both buildings. And I do know that last time, as I said, it took 2.5 hours for somebody on the 70th floor to get out of that building. It's absolutely devastating. I believe, being down there, is tens of thousands of people dead. That's what I believe at this point.
So you're not an emotional person, I see your eyes.
I'm not emotional in the least, and now I'm very emotional about this. I have feelings of revenge, but I just sure hope that the government doesn't arbitrarily select an enemy and decide to, for political reasons, obliterate that enemy just for this. But I do hope they find the people that are responsible for this.
You shot in the back, please get me shot a little bit. Joe, what do you do?
And fell and just hit and just blew out the plaza we were on.
It was complete dark. There is no light. So, thank God, somebody with little light came up, because we couldn't even see what's happening. We all, with dust and debris and.
How'd you get out?
Well, the firefighter, somebody with little light came eventually, and we were following him.
And go to.
What did you do? I'm sorry.
The police officer told everybody to form a human chain, and we held on to each other, and he flashed the light, and he directed us to Building 5, and we went out Building 5.
Did you see people bleeding, and what did you see?
Oh, everybody could see. You want blood? Here's blood. Everybody's bleeding. People are laying all over the floor. It's horrible. And I was there the first time, and this is twice.
CNN producer Rose Arce on the streets of New York. She's joining us by telephone. Rose, can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Judy.
What are you seeing? Tell us where you are.
I am about 2 blocks north of where the World Trade Center used to be standing, and I'm surrounded by firefighters who are just watching helplessly. They've had to suspend their rescue operation, and they're just watching a burning hulk of building right now. The front part of the World Trade Center has completely sheared off, as well as many of the upper floors. And every few minutes you'll hear like a small sort of a rumbling sound, almost like an explosion sound, and another chunk of it will come flying down into the street, creating a situation where rescue personnel just have not been able to get close to this building now for over an hour.
Rose, how close are they to the building?
I'd say the closest people are probably about 2 blocks north of there, just in front of where I am. I spoke to a firefighter a few minutes ago that said that he had to stand there and watch helplessly as at least a dozen people leapt from the upper floors of this building during a fire.
Rose, when the mayor was asked this question at a news conference a little while ago, he said he wasn't able to answer, but given your vantage point, can you tell how large a perimeter, how many square blocks are we talking about that's been devastated?
Well, I'd say that at least, up to 4 blocks north, really 5 blocks north of the World Trade Center, there is debris on top of buildings. There are buildings that have been pierced by debris. The streets are covered with several inches of soot and literally pieces of people's desks. There's office supplies. Where I'm standing right now, I can see there's letters on the floor. There's one woman's resume. There's some insurance papers. Things that clearly came from inside that building.
And Rose, where again you are? How close to what's going on here?
I'm about I'd say about 2.5 blocks north of the World Trade Center.
And are you still seeing victims injured being taken away or walking away, or is that
No, right now there's absolutely nobody that's getting anywhere close to that building. There's just a huge and enormous pieces of debris just falling one right after the other. And as I said, firefighters a lot of them are just standing here helpless, wanting to go in and try to fight the fire, but just can't get any closer because of safety problems.
And Rose, is your sense that there are enough emergency personnel there once they can? I mean, give us a sense of how many emergency personnel you see.
There's an absolute small army of fire safety people. I mean, I even see Immigration and Naturalization Service officers, federal marshals. There are trucks from all over New York. I see license plates, New Jersey, people from upstate New York. There's just a small army of people here, but there's just really not a whole lot that they can do for whoever may be left. right now because it is just such a dangerous situation.
CNN producer Rose Arce, she's talking to us right now. She's a few blocks away from the World Trade Center, describing efforts by rescue personnel who just cannot get close because it is still a very dangerous situation. You heard her say large pieces of debris still coming down. And these pictures we're showing you, all of them taken earlier in the day since the first airplane hit the World Trade Center about 8:48 this morning. And again, these are those still pictures that Aaron first referred to a few minutes ago. Still pictures of a commercial jetliner. This was the second one to come in. This was the plane, the United Airlines Flight 175 that we now know has to be the one that Boeing 767 bound from Boston to Los Angeles. Instead, it ended up inside and going through incomprehensibly one of the towers of the World Trade Center. Just about a block and a half away here in Washington, a block and a half away from the White House, CNN senior White House correspondent John King. John, you were not traveling, of course, with President Bush, who went to Florida yesterday, but you have been talking to a number of people around the president who are trying to stay on top of what's happened.
Trying to stay on top of what has happened, Judy, despite the fact that from the ground up anyway, the White House complex, which you see behind me, the building itself and the old executive office building, which is home to a number of senior administration officials, a virtual ghost town, evacuated this morning. The president, as we have reported, is now at a military installation in the Midwest. The president, first from Florida, stopped at a military installation in Louisiana. He was briefed. Then there was talk that he would come back to Washington, and administration officials saying they believe that is politically very important to send a signal to get the president back to the White House as soon as possible. But the president instead stopped at a second military installation in Nebraska. We are told he is participating in a National Security Council meeting by telephone. Vice President Dick Cheney has been in the White House, underground in the White House Operations Center, the Situation Room, which is a fortified command and control structure, throughout the day with other national security officials, receiving information from around the country and directing U.S. operations from there. We do know on Air Force One en route from Louisiana to the Midwest, the president spoke to the mayor of New York and the governor of New York. He's been in constant contact with officials back here, including members of the congressional leadership, who also have been asked by their security to go to a secure bunker area built for just such a situation, a national security emergency in the United States. The leaders of Congress taken as well to a secure location. Again, the White House grounds were evacuated when all this was taking place this morning. From this perch up here, which you are familiar with from anchoring Inside Politics, you can still see smoke wafting up from the Pentagon and National Airport across the Potomac River, usually one of the nation's busiest, of course, now completely shut down as part of the security precautions being taken here. We are told there is a priority on trying to get the president back to the White House, but priority number one is the president's security. And I've spoken to several senior administration officials as well as some security sources who say at this moment they know of no specific additional threats, but of course they were caught so completely off guard this morning, extra precautions being taken because of the scope of these devastating terrorist attacks. Judy?
All right, John King at a location on top of an office building just a few blocks from the White House, as you can see, reporting on the scene there, where every federal building in the city of Washington has been evacuated. Joining us now on the telephone, former Georgia United States Senator Sam Nunn. Senator Nunn, are you in Atlanta, New York?
Judy, I'm in Wilmington, Delaware.
All right. Senator, longtime leader of the Senate Armed Services Committee, someone who has followed military affairs in this country for so long. What are you thinking right now?
First, it was certainly a day of hate in terms of what was perpetrated by whoever did this, and second, a day of sorrow for the people who are the victims and their families. And it certainly was a cruel and heartless and monstrous type attack. I think it's very important that we steadfast in this country. We always rise to the occasion and work together when we're in a crisis, and I think this qualifies for mustering the American will to remain calm and collected and determined and firm, but most of all, solidarity here at home with the President, following his lead with the governors, with mayors, with the people on the scene, the front lines, the firemen and the policemen and the medical personnel and the nurses and the doctors, people we take for granted every day, but God bless them, and we need to be with them and behind them and